let us look at a very special poem by Yehuda HaLevi. It's called a Muwaššaḥ, and we will explain what that means. It's a Muwaššaḥ of his Cid, of his Lord. It's all very cryptic right now, but hopefully soon we will all have some clarity what this means. Okay, well, let's first explain what a Muwaššaḥ is. What kind of a poem is that? A Muwaššaḥ is a special type of Arabic poem, but as Jews also started adopting styles of Arabic poetry, also became a style of Hebrew poetry. And a Muwaššaḥ has certain defined features. Okay, the most recognizable characteristic, because we don't want to get too technical, the most recognizable aspect is that the last two lines of this poem are not in the classical language of the rest of the poem. Let's say if it's an Arabic poem, Arabs would write in classical Arabic, but the last two lines would not be in classical Arabic. So it could be in a dialect. It could be in Berber. It could be in Romance, which is we could define Romance as a form of Old Spanish or Old Portuguese, or anything, something related to that. Could also be in Hebrew. There's actually they were actually Hebrew Muwaššaḥs that ended with Spanish, but some of them ended with Arabic even. So all these things, it's like the last two are different, and so it's like a climax or an anticlimax. These two lines have a name. They're called the jarha. So the jarha are these two final lines in a different language. It's hard to. It's not so easy to get an accurate translation of the word jarha, because the root jarha could mean different things. But we'll just call it the pun. Okay. Each stanza of a Muwaššaḥ has 5 lines. Now there could be more than, most of the time there's more than one stanza. And by the way, this was also one of the innovative features of a Muwaššaḥ, that it came in stanzas. That is not traditional Arabic poetry. But each Muwaššaḥ does have stanzas, and each stanza has 5 lines. The first 3 lines in each stanza are called the ghusn. That really means branch. Not that it means it helps us, just maybe a branch is easier to remember than ghusn. As we saw, the last stanza ends with the 2 lines of the jarha, right? Those are these 2 lines in the last stanza in a different language. Only in the last stanza is a jarha. But every other stanza, assuming there are more than one, every other stanza also ends with 2 lines. And that's not called a jarha then. That has to be in the same language as the poem itself, as the ghusn. And in these other stanzas, the final lines are called the simt, which means the thread. So every time the simt, the thread comes back, and then it ends. That's the same pattern, the same end rhyme as I will explain, as it rhymes with the words of the jarha. Okay, this is here it comes. Every ghusn can have different end rhymes. So every ghusn can, some of the first ghusn, the first 3 lines of the first stanza could end with in, and the next one could end with or or whatever, right? They can have different end rhymes, but each simt has to have the same. So the last 2 have to have the same rhyme, and they have to have the same rhyme as the jarha. Now, a very simple Muwaššaḥ has only 1 stanza, but that is very rare. In such a case, the whole poem would consist of only 5 lines, a ghusn of 3 lines. I gave here an example, 3 lines in Arabic, and the 2 last lines of the jarha in another language. I just plucked a little rhyme here as an illustration in English, but of course, if it's an Arabic poet, he would write that other language in Arabic letters. So it's not in another script, but just so you visualize it. All right. Now, finally, to understand the Muwaššaḥ, we need to understand that the entire poem culminates in the Jarha. So that is where the entire poem points to. Everything goes towards that Jarha. The Jarha is, this is also interesting to know, is typically not written by the poet himself or herself, but it is an already existing, usually a popular song or a poem. The last two lines are lines that are words that people know, that are on their lips, that they recite. You know, before pop music and before internet, people there were sometimes popular songs. People made up songs and caught on, and everybody's singing it, and that's how it was. It's hard to maybe to imagine now, but okay. So a poem who wants to write a Muwaššaḥ will first choose these two well-known lines for his jarha, for his pun, and then we'll build the rest of his Muwaššaḥ around it. However, this is very relevant. The context that these two lines at the end of the poem are now in a whole different context, and he will give that these words of the jarha a whole different meaning and a whole different context. We're going to see Yehuda HaLevi does that. Therefore, in order to really understand the Muwaššaḥ, we should understand first the jarha in its original meaning, if that's at all possible. It's not always possible. We don't know really these popular songs and poems, but sometimes you can figure it out, what it really meant, if you're lucky. And then we figure out how the poet changes the meaning of these two lines through the new context that he places them in. Okay, so we first look at our jarha. This at the end, the last two lines. We start with the last two lines, and then we go through the whole poem. And let's see if we can figure out the original meaning of the jarha. Okay, here's a jarha. So it's in Spanish. Descam neusidilo benit tambona albesara, com rayo de sol esit en Guadalajara. It rhymes. Now you already know that every simt all has rhymes with ara. Okay, very nice. But what does it mean? It means, as soon as my Lord comes, such a good tiding flashes out like a ray of the sun in Guadalajara. Guadalajara is a city in Spain, and also South America. There's other cities that were named after this original Guadalajara. Here's it's a very old city. You see here a photo of the medieval gate in the wall of the city, and as soon as my Lord comes, we will find out who that Lord is, hopefully. Okay, so the second one here. Let's first look at Meu Sidilo. Even if you speak Spanish, you might not understand it, most likely. Meu Sidilo is translated as my Lord. So meu means my. I think it would be modern Spanish me. But meu, so as soon as my Lord comes, there's a good tiding. Let's look at the words that I put in red. What does this mean, meu sidilo? Here we go to the next slide. Now, we spoke about Old Spanish, which was called Mos Arabic, which is Spanish that was, well, what is really Spanish? Spanish is just, there were all these dialects, you know? It's not an official language. Probably came from Visigoth, heavily influenced by Latin. In any case, that's what I think. And Mos Arabic means it is heavily influenced by Arabic. It's like a type of Spanish, Portuguese, heavily influenced by Arabic. Okay, Sidilo consists of two parts, Sid and Ilo. Ilo is a suffix, meaning an ending. Those who know Spanish, or even a little Spanish, you can make, for instance, they have these endings in Spanish, and in many languages, in Spanish, for instance, you can make a word small. That's called a diminutive. Let's say you have sir is señor. Now, a small sir, meaning young man, is señorito. A female, a lady is or madam, senora, and a young lady is señorita. So ito and ita is an ending in Spanish that makes things small, right? So ilo is similar. It's but not sure if this is a diminutive. It's not certain if that was a diminutive. It also made it small. Could also be endearing. So my dear Lord, or something like that. So Cid. What is Cid? It's not. I don't think it's common now in Spanish. But Cid comes from Arabic because it's Mozarabic. It's influenced by Arabic, and it comes from well, the official Arabic word is Sayyid, but Cid is colloquial. Is still in Morocco, North Africa, even Algeria, they don't say Sayyid, they say Cid. And so Spanish Arabic is not spoken anymore, but most likely it was very related to Moroccan dialect. So Cid would have been Lord. So Cidilo, meu Cidilo, or meu Cid, my Lord. All right. So that is in the Jarha. We saw that. We'll continue. Here it is again. There's another word that I've made in red that requires some explanation. Deskan meu Cidilo benid, when as soon as my Lord comes, tan bona al-besara. Al-besara, if it starts with al, then you can bet on it, it's an Arabic word. All right. So it says here, as soon as my Lord comes, such good tiding. So good is bona. Al-besara as tiding also means good tiding by itself. So I already explained here about Cid and Mozarabic. So the last paragraph here. Several Mozarabic words are still part of Spanish. In the same first line of the Jarha, you can see the word al-besara, good tiding, which comes from the Arabic al-bashara, which means tiding or good tiding. And it's also related to the Hebrew word besora, means good news. Besorot is plural, right? Or good news, besorot avot. In later Spanish, al-besara became albricias. Albricias means good news. All right, so exactly, we know where we are. Now, it's a little bit about the language. We'll go to the next slide. My Cid, my Lord, there was a famous and celebrated Cid, and he's called, as a legendary folk hero, he's called El Cid, the Cid. He wasn't named El Cid by his parents. His real name was Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, or Vivar. Maybe, I'm not sure if in those days they still pronounce the V as a V and not as a B. That I'm not sure of. So maybe Vivar or Vivar. Okay, so he was born around 1046 and he died in 1099. So these heroes do not get old, right? So 56. And he was nicknamed El Cid Campeador. Now in modern Spanish, El Cid Campeador means champion. So it would be El Cid the champion, but in Mozarabic Spanish it meant master. El Cid is master or lord of the battlefield. Campeador has to do with the battlefield. El Cid was a warlord, very interesting person. As probably maybe for some, one of the most interesting parts of this whole mini lecture. So El Cid was a warlord, had his own army, as warlords tend to do. Because what is a warlord without an army? He first fought for King Sancho II, and later under Sancho's successor was Sancho's brother, Alfonso VI. Okay, so far so good. Then El Cid attacked, well, like, yeah, he likes to be busy, the Muslim Taifa of Granada, all the way in the south, without the king's authority. The king is sad, pissed, so to say. And he exiled El Cid. Get out of my empire, my kingdom. Now, what does El Cid do? He offers his service to the Islamic Taifa of Zaragoza. He became the leader of its armed forces. So this is interesting. An Islamic Taifa with a Christian army leader. In those days, the Christians and Muslims and these alliances and stuff sometimes went back and forth. You could have a Muslim army with a team up with a Christian army to fight a rival, either Christian or Muslim. But everything It was not as black and white as we might think it was. Okay, so but that is quite something. Now, we saw in a previous class that in 1086, the Christians, and this was Alfonso the same Alfonso the Sixth, conquered Toledo. Right, this is where Yehuda HaLevi was born, and he was 11 years old, 10 or 11 when this happened. So the Taifas, these Taifas, lost the entire Taifa of Toledo. So all the other Taifas, like, we have to get stronger. These Christians are making big headway. So these Taifas now asked Berbers in Morocco, the Almoravids, to come to Al-Andalus and to help them out. All right, so now we know why these Almoravids came after Toledo was conquered by the Christians. It was a reaction to the Christian Reconquista of Toledo. So the Almoravids, successfully, together with the armies of the Taifas, defeated a huge combined army of the kingdoms combined of Leon and Aragon and Castile. They thought they'll smash the Almoravids. The Almoravids beat them, and Alfonso VI is shocked. And he asks El Cid to return. Could you please help me again? You don't have to be in exile anymore. No. El Cid briefly returns, but soon enough, he doesn't like it. He's too independent by now, and he goes back to Saragossa. Now look at this map. The Almoravid dynasty here at this point is already taken over most of the Taifas. First helping the Taifas, but then defeating the Taifas and taking over from the Taifas because these Taifas were corrupt and not religious enough. There's only Taifas left are Saragossa, Alpuente, and Albarracin. So tiny, and that doesn't last long. But Saragossa is independent, and that is most likely because of El Cid with his army helps defend them. Now, these Christians and these Almoravids are fighting each other left and right, and El Cid doesn't stick out a finger. He doesn't help Alfonso to beat out the Almoravids. Even the Almoravids could have totally conquered his entire army. The whole kingdom, his whole kingdom of Castile could have fallen to the Almoravids. He just let it be. He just waited until the two had weakened each other out because he had his own plans. He then, after a while, started to conquer territory for himself. El Cid conquered the city of Valencia, you see there in green, in the green territory at the coast, and the area around it. So officially he ruled over it on behalf of Alfonso, but in reality he was the ruler, almost like the king. The Lord, the Cid, El Cid, right? So he had this, his private principality was both Christian and Muslim. And both Christians and Muslims served in the army side by side. And they were employed in the government and in the administration. So this dream that people have of, in Spain, under Islam, which is not entirely true, but that's what people think. Under Islam in Spain, there was a golden age where everybody was equal. We know they weren't equal, but they functioned together. That's maybe good enough. But what we see here, that the equality, just in a split slice of history, happened under El Cid. So that alone makes him legendary in a way, right? Only his semi-kingdom only lasted for 5 years, but a few years during his life, and then after he died, his wife took over for 2 years and then was deposed, and that was the end of the happy kingdom of El Cid. So, but he became a hero for both Christians and Muslims, where he would come, if he would come your area and he would conquer, people would be on equal footage, and so and there's no extra taxes for minorities, etc., etc. He was hailed, he was venerated. So here we go back to our Jarha. Descan me civilo benit tan bona albesara, com raya de sol acid en Guadalajara. Okay, so given the term Cid or Cidilo in the Jarha for Lord, and given the context of the time, it seems likely that the words of the Jarha were an existing song in praise of El Cid. So people were singing, oh, when El Cid comes, it'll be good. He's like the ray of the sun from Guadalajara. But that's the only part of, so now we know the Cidillo in the Jarha, most likely. But this is only part of the puzzle, because, as mentioned before, the poet will give the words of this Jarha an entirely new meaning. So, now that we know who the Cidillo or the Cid in this Jarha was, let's look at the main body of the poem of the Muwaššaḥ. Now we'll start with the first stanza. Here we go. The first Rusen. That's the Rusen, if you remember. Those are the three first lines of any stanza. So this is called the Rusen, the branch. The Rusen goes as follows. When the chiefs of the people assemble, with kings in their council, all of them praise Joseph, for he is the fountain of their glory. To rule by the hand of God he aspires, and thus he rules over men. So the poem tells us, what's the first impression we get? Of a worthy ruler by the name of Joseph, who rules by the hand of God. It says, right, by the hand of God. He wants to rule by the hands of God, and therefore he rules over men. Our immediate question then is, who is this Joseph? By the late 1800s, Rabbi and scholar Heinrich Brody wrote that this Muwaššaḥ was Yehuda HaLevi's praise of Rabbi Joseph, that's a Joseph, Ben Meir ibn Migash, because he was his, Yehuda HaLevi's personal friend from youth, and Spain's leading Talmud scholar in Lucena. But Talmud scholar, this opinion has been repeated by most people, even when I tried to find the Hebrew text for this Muwaššaḥ, which I have. You can have it if you like it. I'll give it to you. I found the Hebrew text, and it said on the bottom in Hebrew, this is in praise of Rabbi Joseph ibn Migash. But the poem's describing a powerful warrior. We saw a bit, but we'll see even more, and a ruler, and that hardly fits a Talmud scholar who's just in his chair and in his library and in his teaching class. So in 1978, Professor Herman Solomon brought forth a very different explanation about this Joseph. And that is the opinion that I will present here today. So let's continue to the first Rusen again. We already read it. I'm not going to read it again, but it says, it's the first line, when the chiefs of the people assemble. Now, these words are literally from a text in the Torah, Deuteronomy 33, verse 5. And that goes, a king arose in Yeshurun. Yeshurun is another name for Israel. So there's a king from Israel. That's why rabbis have seen this text as a messianic prediction, right? When the chiefs of the people were assembled. So when the chiefs of the people assembled, it's exactly the same words. In Hebrew, it's in an opposite order, but exactly the same words. This is definitely taken from that. So this text is often usually interpreted as a messianic text. And we will see that this is relevant for the understanding of our of this Muwaššaḥ. Now we go to the Sim. Those are the last two lines of the stanza that will have the same rhyme as the Jarha. Here we go. The choicest man whose every utterance is clear and pure. The high dignity suited for a ruler is a crown of beauty. Okay, this Joseph now is called the choicest man. That means the most perfect, the most wonderful man you can ever think of, right? The one person with the most excellent character, it continues, whose every utterance is clear and pure. Everything he says is pure, is true, is considerate, is informed, is kind, is beautiful, is honorable, and you can go on. So this is a very special person. Somebody who never curses, who's never impatient. All he says is, everything that comes over his lips is worth writing down, basically, and recording. This Joseph is not just a victorious warrior like El Cid was, but he's somebody with highly refined and elevated character traits. He's like somebody you want to be like, or the ideal son-in-law, so to say. Okay. HaLevi also mentions a crown of beauty that is suited for this dignified person. Crown of beauty, let's go for that. This is the second person. It continues that, let me read the text. Even if it exceeds all human treasure, the world and its fullness, still I heard her say that her chief desire is her prince. As a throne for Joseph, God fashioned her. Not for naught did he create her. All right. So even though this is about the crown, this crown of beauty, I think it's not so much a materialistic beauty. I think it's more like a spiritual beauty, or a moral beauty, okay. So even though the value of this crown is worth more than all treasures on earth, yes, worth more than the entire earth, its only purpose is to adorn this Joseph. And it says in the poem that God himself created it for his throne, meaning for his kingship. Now the words, not for naught did he create her, meaning not for nothing did he create it, the crown of beauty. That seems to imply that it was created and reserved for this Joseph for a very long time, and that one might give up hope already. It's taking so long, and think that his coronation will probably never happen. In other words, that God created this special crown for nothing. But therefore, Yehuda HaLevi says, not for nothing did he create her. Finally, this beautification that is stored in the treasures of heaven, or if God's mind, perhaps, will finally be given to the one who is worthy of this Joseph person. Now the two last lines of the second stanza. Through him the heavy burden is lightened, for he overcomes and rules. It seems that there's a heavy burden on the people, and that is taken away when this particular Joseph takes over and he rules instead of the previous oppressive rulers. What kind of a person this Joseph is becomes quite clear by now, right? Most people can figure it out. We talk about a pure person who makes life easier for the people, who takes over dominion and rules by the hand of God. That person must be nothing less than a messianic redeemer. And that is exactly what Professor Solomon argued in his article titled Yehuda, HaLevi and El Cid. So we're getting pieces of the puzzle. We're not there yet. Okay, the last line of the second stanza. And in the tower of strength, he establishes his reign with his 10 who fled. A tower of strength is a common biblical expression for strength, stability, and righteousness. But now the question comes up, who are his 10 who fled? And how do they fit into this messianic expectation? In one of our previous classes, which was called Hazai B'Shabrut, we discussed the notion of the 10 lost tribes of Israel and the expectation that these 10 tribes will return, will show up again. They were disappeared, that they'll show up again from their exile with the coming of the Messiah. So these 10 who fled, right, where he has his tower of strength, where he establishes his reign with the 10 who fled, that could very well be the leaders of the 10 lost tribes. It would perfectly fit. The third stanza. The first line is of the Husin, Ben Porat, with your bow kept tight, your deeds excel. In the Torah, Ben Porat is another name for Joseph. So in another class called Byzantine Jews before the advent of Islam, we've seen the notion of two separate messiahs. The first one is called Messiah ben Joseph, who will be a military messiah. And after him, one that is called Messiah ben David, a messianic king who will rule during an era of peace. So we have a military messiah and then a messiah of peace. By the way, Sadi Gaon says the military messiah might not have to come. It all depends, but in any case, that's a possible scenario of two messiahs. So Yehuda HaLevi uses the name Joseph as shorthand, it seems, for Mashiach ben Joseph. His bow, no, I say it again, his bow is kept tight. So he's an archer. It means that he remains militarily alert. That fits the image of the Messiah ben Joseph. We'll go to the second line of the third lesson. The goodness of days is from you, and for you they break into fresh song. So because of this Messiah, hard times are finally over and happy days are here again. And then the line, they break out into fresh song. Literally in Hebrew, into a new song. That's a well-known expression in Judaism, and quite often, not always, but quite often in connection with messianic expectations. For instance, in Psalm 96, verse 1, here it is, sing unto the Lord a new song, sing unto the Lord all the earth. So all the earth can be interpreted as referring to an age in which God's kingdom stretches over the entire earth, i.e. a messianic age. The third line, you are the sun and the falling rain, yet greater are you than they. Okay, all right. You are the sun and the falling rain. So the sun is an image of light and strength, and rain is an image of care and nourishment. At the same time, it ties into our jarha that we looked at before, what said flashes like a ray of the sun in Guadalajara. So flashes like a ray of the sun. Here is you are the sun. And so this is a description of this messianic Joseph, which is going to be summarized in this pre-existing Spanish, these two lines. Now, every burning, and this same message that we saw in the previous sentence, you are the sun, continues here. Ever burning lights shine out through you, and radiance breaks forth upon the earth. She too, I think that's the earth, will testify that she was helped by you. So once again, this ties into the jarha flashes like a ray of the sun in Guadalajara. Even the earth is helped by this Redeemer. That is. Go to the fourth stanza. It becomes more and more messianic and nicer in a way, I think, if it's all true. What is that multitude of abused people, heaping blame upon their fate? Before the festering thorn was pulled out, burning in consuming fire, before the coming of the worthy God-inspired man standing among his myrtles. Well, rephrasing this Hosen, the messianic message is unmistakable. Before this worthy man of God appears, there are multitudes of abused people. Jewish people, no doubt, who are, Yehuda HaLevi has told us, addressed it often in his Kuzari and in his poetry, who are oppressed and despised. This Joseph will pull out the festering thorn of the diaspora. I wonder, could burning in consuming fire perhaps refer to the burning of Jews by Jew-hating mobs? Very well possible, I think. The end of the fourth stanza. For his roar frightens princes. He hits in the eye of the target. His God appoints him a leader, a fortress of strength in time of distress. So his roar frightens princes, and he hits in the eye of the target. So even though this Joseph is good and kind and the choicest of man, pleasant to be with, no doubt, he commands awe and respect. And once again, here's the image of a fortress of strength. Now, we'll go to the final stanza. Rivers of oil overflow the river of stones. It sounds cryptic. With good tidings, announcing the Lord, who nourishes God's people with delights. Long live the Prince, say ye Amen. And they raised their voices singing. I didn't write this down, but the last line before the final two lines, the jarha, is usually, and she sang, and he sang, and he shouted, and here it says, and they raised their voice singing, and that's right before these two lines that everybody already knows. And then they, because of what the poet described. Nobody knows what the ending is, which famous lines he chooses. And he says, so therefore they sing, and then, the jarha, these famous historical lines that people know, all of a sudden mean something else. But we're going to see this soon. So this last stanza is full of messianic references. The expression good tidings here, see, with good tidings announcing the Lord. So the good tidings in Hebrew, Besorot Tovot, always has a strong messianic connotation in Hebrew. And usually we're hoping for good tidings, meaning the messianic era will come. So when you say good tidings in Hebrew, Besorot Tovot, then that has a messianic connotation, almost unmistakably. And also, it reflects the jarha again. As soon as my Lord comes, such good tidings. In Spanish, right? Al-Basara, Besorot and Al-Basara. Then God nurtures his people with delights in line 22. The word delights is in Hebrew adanim, which is derived from the word Eden, which means paradise. So it is really, hopefully, a most beautiful time that he is expecting, or at least telling people to expect. And then the most striking sentence, I think, or one of the most interesting sentences in this Muwaššaḥ is rivers of oil overflow the river of stones. Rivers of oil refers to the anointment of the Messiah. So the very word Mashiach, Messiah, Mashiach in Hebrew means anointed, and that means with oil. So anointing is an essential part of a Jewish king's consecration and coronation. So, okay, that's good, that's understood. But now, what is the river of stones? Go to our next slide. The river of stones also refers to the notion of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. According to Jewish legend, the Assyrian king Shalmaneser, who took these tribes into exile, deported them beyond a fierce river called the Sambation. The rapids of that river drag enormous boulders with them in unbelievable speed, and fire and smoke, and so that makes it impossible to cross. However, according to legend, it's even written or described already in the Talmud, but it has triggered the fantasies of many people. People have gone out on travels, on long trips to try to find this river. But every week, miraculously, on the Sabbath, this river stops flowing. Maybe that's why it's called Sambation. It sounds like Sabbath, the Sabbath river. It stops flowing, and then you could cross, but of course the 10 tribes will not cross because that would be violating Shabbat. They can't travel on Shabbat, so they're stuck on the other side of the river. Now, the line in the last stanza, rivers of oil overflow the river of stones. That seems to mean that the anointment of the Messianic king, which is rivers of oil, that calms down the Sambation river, and that enables the lost tribes to return. So the river of stones, by the way, it's very interesting. The river of stones is a brilliant word play on the Arabic Spanish name of the town. In Arabic, it's called Wadi al-Hajara. In Arabic, that's Guadalajara. And Guadalajara, Wadi al-Hajara, literally means in Arabic, and it's mentioned in our jarha, literally means river of stones. Wadi means river or valley, and al-Hajara means stones. So it comes all together now. So now finally we're going to go back to our jarha, to the lines of praise for El Cid that were on the people's lips. As predicted, the words have taken on a different meaning. I'll read it again. As soon as my Lord comes, such good tidings flashes out like a ray of the sun in Guadalajara. So the Lord, the Sidilo, who's coming in such good tidings is now not El Cid, but there's another superior Cid, another superior Lord, one that is pure in his words, victorious in battle, and sent by God himself to take over the reins of the world. To summarize, Yehuda HaLevi's Muwaššaḥ is a poem of messianic anticipation. The battle between Christian and Islamic forces was perceived by him and maybe others as the battle of Gog and Magog, the two big powers of the world, Islam and Christianity, were fighting it out in Spain and in the Promised Land and the Holy Land. And so they saw that was the battle that was prophesied to happen in the last days before the final redemption. In a turbulent world, expectations were high once again, as we've seen already a few times. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope this made things a bit clear.